Hey gardening friends, it's that time of year, my favorite time of the year, which is to plant up the tomato plants. So in this video, I'm going to be planting my tomato plants for the year, as well as watermelon and cantaloupe. I grow tomato plants in whiskey barrels as well as other containers. So this year I will be growing in 3 of the whiskey barrels and 2 3-gallon pots. I've prepared these pots maybe about a week ago. I refreshed the soil by adding mushroom compost, worm castings, blood meal, and bone meal, and I have a video showing myself refreshing all of the containers. So these are pretty much ready to go. I'm just adding a little more of the mushroom compost and mixing that in. Now, one of the things that I do in my garden journal, I will sketch out all of my containers, and I will figure out which plants I'm growing in which containers. The first thing I'm going to do is just using my diagram is to lay out all of the plants in their containers, just to make sure that I have everything laid out properly before I plant. This year I'll be growing Brandywine Red, Black Krim, Amana Orange, Goose Creek. All are indeterminate heirloom tomatoes. And then I'll be growing 2 cherry tomatoes that are hybrids, Sun Gold and Super Sweet 100. I like to companion plant my tomatoes with French marigolds as well as basil. Both can help deter pests such as whiteflies and tomato hornworm. Specifically, the marigolds also produce a natural chemical that reduces the root knot nematodes, which tends to be more of a problem when you're gardening in ground than in containers. But I do like to add those to the soil just in case. So as we pot up the tomato plants, keep in mind these plants are only 6 weeks old. I started these on April 1st. It is now May 15th, and I have, nice sized plants that are healthy. So just keep that in mind when you're starting your tomato plants. You don't have to start them, 3 months in advance. So you'll end up with a nice plant with a strong root system. This first plant that we're going to plant in the whiskey barrel is the Goose Creek indeterminate slicing tomato. Nice root system, nice plant height. It looks healthy. Only 6 weeks old. Since the plants are pretty stocky, I don't have to bury them very deep. I'm not concerned about that. They're not too lanky. This next plant is the Brandywine Red, which is what is called a tomato leaf. A tomato, you'll notice that the leaves look a little different than on your typical tomatoes. I typically grow these in one of the 3-gallon pots, but wanted to see if I have greater productivity if I grow them in the larger wine barrels. This next tomato is the Black Krim. I did grow this like many years ago with not a lot of success, so I'm anxious to see how well they'll do this year. And so that's Black Krim, which is a mahogany colored, kind of a salty flavored tomato. And next we have Amana Orange, which is a new tomato to me. I've never grown this before. It's a sweet tropical tasting orange tomato. The tomatoes can be as large as 5 inches in diameter, so pretty large fruit size. In the last whiskey barrel, I'll be planting up the cherry tomato. So here I just have the Sun Gold. There's actually 2 plants in 1 cell pack. So I'll let those grow for a week or 2, and then I'll cut back the weaker plant. I'll cut that back to the soil surface. I will also be adding the Super Sweet 100. Those plants were a little too small to put out, so I will plant those out maybe in another week. Next, I'm going to add the tomato cages. These tomato cages I've had for probably 4 or 5 years. I purchased these from Gardener Supply, and I've been very happy and very satisfied with them. They do a great job of supporting your plants, and you don't have to use clips unless you really need them, but you don't have to clip, you don't have to tie anything. They really are pretty much maintenance free. They come in 2 halves. There's a lower half and then a top half. Today I'm just going to be adding the lower half of the trellis, and then I'll come back in another probably week or two and I'll add the top half. For the tomato plants that are growing in the 3-gallon pots, I have some tomato trellises that I'll be adding later on to those pots to help support the tomatoes as they begin to grow. Providing proper support for your tomatoes as they're growing is very important. As your plants grow larger and start to produce fruit, the fruit becomes can be very heavy, and so your plant really does rely upon whatever staking or trellis system or caging system that you have in place in order to support the plant. The tomatoes are all planted up, and next I'm going to be planting sugar baby watermelon as well as a variety of cantaloupe. So these are containers that I've already prepped. They're 50% potting soil, 50% mushroom compost, as well as bone and blood meal. I started these seeds in 5-inch peat pots, and I started multiple plants in one pot with the idea that once I plant them outdoors, I can clip back and only keep the strongest plant. But one of the things I'm going to do first is I'm going to trim the top rim of the peat pot so that it is flush with the soil in the pot. When I plant this in the soil, I want to make sure that the peat pot is totally covered with the potting mix, but I also want to make sure that I'm planting the pot at the same level of the soil that's in the peat pot. And if you've ever grown in peat pots, you know that they dry out very quickly. So it's important that when you plant this peat pot, that the top of the peat pot is completely covered with the potting soil. But again, you don't want to bury your plants any deeper than the original soil line. So here I'm just going around and making sure that the peat pot is covered and no edges are sticking out. I have, I believe, 5 plants in this peat pot, and ultimately I'd like to end up with 2. So I've trimmed back 2, and I have 3 plants remaining, and so we'll let these grow for another week or 2, and then I'll trim back the weakest of the 3. In the second pot, I'm going to be planting up the Hale's Best jumbo cantaloupe, and I grew these last year for the first time, and they were terrific. I'll be doing the same thing. I started these indoors in a peat pot, and I'll be trimming back that top rim of the peat pot so that it's flush with the top of the soil. And then when I actually pot it, I'll just make sure that I fully cover the edge of the peat pot to prevent it from drying out. You may be wondering why I'm doing all of this, and it's because watermelon specifically plants do not like to have their roots disturbed. So by growing in the peat pots and then just planting the pots out, it really just limits the possibility of disturbing the roots. Everything is planted. The peat pot is covered. I have 3 of the cantaloupe there, and I'll just trim back the weakest of the plant to the soil surface, and I'll do the same with the watermelon. So next we'll have to water everything in. Over the next several days, we're expecting a mini heat wave with temperatures in the high 90s, which will be far too harsh for these newly planted seedlings. So I will be covering these with a shade cloth, and this is something that you can buy at your local garden center or even on Amazon. And the purpose of this cloth is it will shade out a certain percentage of the sun rays. And again, you can purchase this in different percentages. This happens to be a 40% shade cloth. It will be doubled. I'm not sure if that means that it will filter out 80% of the sun, but nonetheless, it will certainly protect the seedlings from the harsh heat wave. And here it is the next day. As you can see, it's a very sunny day out, and I've used the trellises to create a little bit of a tent over the seedlings. You can see the filtered sun is making its way to the plant, so they're still getting some sun, but just not the full force of the 97 degrees harsh sun. So they're all looking really great. Happy gardening.